Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union, May 1st, 1960, 08:30 hours local time, 70,000 feet above the Ural Mountains, higher than any aircraft in history had flown. A single American pilot cruises through the stratosphere in a machine that officially does not exist. Francis Gary Powers checks his instrument panel. Altitude 68,000 feet, airspeed 410 knots, outside temperature -60 degrees Fahrenheit. The curvature of the Earth is visible through his cockpit glass. Below him, the Soviet Union stretches in every direction, a landmass he has been photographing for the past 4 hours. He is 9 hours into a mission that was supposed to take him from Peshawar, Pakistan, across the entire Soviet Union, to Bodø, Norway, 2,800 miles over denied territory, the longest overflight ever attempted. Powers doesn't know that Soviet radar tracked him the moment he crossed the border. He doesn't know that Premier Nikita Khrushchev has been awakened and briefed. He doesn't know that 14 Soviet MiG fighters are climbing toward him and failing to reach his altitude. And he doesn't know that in exactly 7 minutes, a newly deployed SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missile battery near Sverdlovsk will lock onto his aircraft and fire. The missile will detonate close enough to shear off his tail section. And Francis Gary Powers, along with the most secret reconnaissance program in American history, will fall from the sky. For 4 years, the U-2 had given America something unprecedented, the ability to see inside the Soviet Union. Every missile site, every bomber base, every nuclear facility, photographed in stunning detail from the edge of space. The Soviets knew the planes were there. They tracked every flight. They protested through diplomatic channels. But they couldn't touch them until today. Before this mission vanishes from the record, subscribe and help uncover the truth they tried to bury. But how did we get here? How did a single airplane become the most important intelligence asset in American history? Rewind to 1954, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon. President Dwight D. Eisenhower sits in the Oval Office reading intelligence reports that terrify him. The Soviet Union has detonated a hydrogen bomb. They're building long-range bombers capable of reaching American cities, and American intelligence has almost no idea how many or where they're based. The problem is simple and terrifying. The Soviet Union is a closed society covering 11 time zones. No Western journalists travel freely. No businessmen visit factories. No tourists photograph military bases. The Iron Curtain isn't a metaphor. It's an operational reality. American intelligence relies on defector reports, intercepted communications, and educated guesses. But defectors are rare and their information is dated. Communications intercepts reveal intentions, not capabilities, and guesses aren't good enough when nuclear war is the stakes. Eisenhower needs eyes inside the Soviet Union. The Air Force proposes sending reconnaissance versions of B-47 bombers over Soviet territory. Eisenhower rejects the plan immediately. Bombers fly too low. Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft guns could shoot them down. A captured American bomber crew over Soviet territory would be an act of war. But what if an aircraft could fly so high that no Soviet weapon could touch it? Enter Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson is the chief designer at Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division, a secretive facility in Burbank, California, that will become known as the Skunk Works. He's already designed the P-38 Lightning, the P-80 Shooting Star, and the F-104 Starfighter. He's the most innovative aircraft designer in America. In 1954, Johnson approaches the CIA with a radical proposal, a purpose-built reconnaissance aircraft capable of sustained flight above 70,000 feet, higher than any Soviet fighter or missile can reach. An aircraft so light that it's essentially a powered glider with a jet engine. An aircraft that can photograph the entire Soviet Union from the edge of space. CIA Director Allen Dulles takes the proposal to Eisenhower. The president approves it immediately, with one condition. The program will be run entirely by the CIA, not the Air Force. If a plane goes down over Soviet territory, the United States government will deny any knowledge. The pilots will be civilians, former military officers who have officially resigned from service. The aircraft will carry no military markings. The program is given a code name, Aquatone. The aircraft is designated U-2, the U standing for utility, a deliberately boring classification meant to deflect curiosity. Kelly Johnson promises to deliver the first aircraft in 8 months. He delivers in 7. Lockheed's Skunk Works, Burbank, California, August 1955. The first U-2 prototype sits in a hangar hidden from Soviet satellites that might photograph American aerospace facilities. It looks like nothing else in aviation. The fuselage is impossibly slender, essentially a tube containing the pilot, cameras, and fuel. The wings span 103 feet, longer than a B-29 bomber's, but are so thin they droop when the aircraft sits on the ground. The landing gear is a bicycle configuration. One wheel in front, one in back. No wing wheels at all. The aircraft is so light that the wings flex visibly during flight. Everything about the U-2 is designed to minimize weight and maximize altitude. The single Pratt & Whitney J57 engine produces 17,000 pounds of thrust, enough to push the lightweight airframe to altitudes no aircraft has reached before. But the engine operates at the ragged edge of physics at 70,000 feet. The air is so thin that the margin between stall speed and maximum speed shrinks to just 10 knots. Pilots call this the coffin, corner, fly too slow, and the aircraft stalls, fly too fast, and it tears itself apart. The pilot sits in a pressurized cockpit wearing a modified pressure suit, essentially a prototype spacesuit. If the cockpit loses pressure at 70,000 feet, the pilot's blood would literally boil without protection. The suit is uncomfortable, restrictive, and essential for survival, but the heart of the U-2 is its camera system. The primary sensor is the Hikon Model 73B camera, a masterpiece of American optical engineering. It carries 18,000 feet of film on a 9-inch wide roll, capable of photographing a swath of territory 700 miles wide, with resolution sufficient to identify individual aircraft on runways. From 70,000 feet, the camera can photograph objects as small as 2 feet across. A single U-2 mission can photograph more Soviet territory than every spy in CIA history combined. Test flights begin in secrecy at a remote Nevada facility, a dry lake bed that will later become famous as Area 51. CIA pilots push the aircraft higher and higher, learning its quirks and limitations. The U-2 is difficult to fly, unforgiving of errors, demanding constant attention. Pilots call her the Dragon Lady. By June 1956, the U-2 is ready for operational deployment. Wiesbaden, West Germany, July 4, 1956. The first operational U-2 overflight of the Soviet Union launches on American Independence Day, a detail Eisenhower personally approves for its symbolic value. Pilot Harvey Stockman takes off from the American Air Base at Wiesbaden, climbs to 70,000 feet, and crosses into East German airspace. He continues east over Poland into the Soviet Union itself. For the next 9 hours, Stockman photographs everything below: military installations, rail yards, factories, airfields. Soviet radar tracks him the entire time. MiG fighters scramble and climb toward the intruder, but they can't reach him. They flame out at 50,000 feet, still 20,000 feet below the American aircraft. The Soviets watch helplessly as an American aircraft photographs their most sensitive military installations. Stockman lands in Wiesbaden with 18,000 feet of exposed film. Photo interpreters at CIA headquarters work through the night developing and analyzing the images. What they find exceeds expectations. The photographs reveal Soviet bomber bases previously unknown to American intelligence. They show construction patterns at nuclear facilities. They provide the first accurate count of Soviet long-range bombers. A count that reveals the bomber gap that terrified American planners is largely fictional. The Soviets have far fewer bombers than Air Force estimates predicted. A single flight has transformed American understanding of Soviet military capability. Eisenhower authorizes more missions. Over the next 4 years, U-2 aircraft conduct 24 deep penetration overflights of the Soviet Union. They photograph every major military installation. They track the development of Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles at Tyuratam. They monitor nuclear weapons facilities at Chelyabinsk and Tomsk. They provide the intelligence that allows American planners to accurately assess the Soviet nuclear threat. The intelligence is priceless, but each mission carries enormous risk. The Soviets know the flights are happening. They track every aircraft on radar. They file diplomatic protests through back channels. Furious but impotent, their fighters can't reach the U-2s. Their anti-aircraft missiles fall short, but Soviet engineers are working on the problem, and by 1960, they've solved it. Pound, Virginia, 1931. Francis Gary Powers is born in the coal country of Appalachia, a region of hard work, poverty, and patriotism. His father works as a cobbler, barely making enough to support the family. Young Frank grows up knowing the value of determination. He's fascinated by aircraft from childhood. During World War II, he watches military planes fly overhead and dreams of becoming a pilot. After high school, he enrolls at Milligan College in Tennessee, working part-time jobs to pay tuition. He joins the Air Force ROTC program and discovers he has natural flying ability. In 1950, Powers enlists in the United States Air Force. He earns his pilot wings and is assigned to fighter squadrons in Georgia and Arizona. His performance evaluations are consistently excellent. He's a skilled, disciplined aviator, exactly what the CIA is looking for. In 1956, Powers receives a mysterious summons. A civilian approaches him at his base and asks if he'd be interested in a special flying assignment that would require resigning his Air Force commission. The pay would be $25,000 per year, more than twice his Air Force salary. Powers agrees to learn more. What follows is a battery of physical and psychological tests, unlike anything in standard military assessment. Doctors test his tolerance for high altitude. Psychologists evaluate his ability to handle stress and isolation. Security investigators dig into every aspect of his life. Powers passes every test. In May 1956, he signs a contract with the CIA, though the contract never mentions the agency by name. He officially resigns from the Air Force and becomes a civilian employee of Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. His actual employer is the Central Intelligence Agency. Powers reports to Area 51 for training on the U-2. He learns to fly the demanding aircraft, to operate its camera systems, to handle the pressure suit that keeps him alive at extreme altitude. He makes his first operational flight in 1957. Over the next 3 years, Francis Gary Powers becomes one of the most experienced U-2 pilots in the program. He flies missions from bases in Turkey, Pakistan, and Japan, photographing Soviet missile sites, tracking nuclear facilities, gathering intelligence that shapes American defense policy. He knows the risks. Every pilot knows that a mechanical failure over Soviet territory means either death or capture. They carry suicide pins, tiny needles coated with shellfish toxin that cause death within seconds. The CIA offers them, but doesn't require their use. Powers carries his in a silver dollar with a hidden compartment. By April 1960, Powers has flown 27 operational missions. He's earned a reputation as a skilled, reliable pilot. On April 9th, he receives orders for Operation Grand Slam, the most ambitious U-2 mission ever attempted. Peshawar, Pakistan, April 30th, 1960, 2300 hours. Francis Gary Powers sits in the ready room at Peshawar Air Station, reviewing mission materials for Operation Grand Slam. The flight plan shows a route that seems almost impossibly ambitious. He will take off from Pakistan, fly north across Afghanistan, and into Soviet airspace. He will cross the entire Soviet Union from south to north, photographing the Tyuratam missile complex, the nuclear facilities at Chelyabinsk, the submarine bases at Murmansk. He will exit Soviet airspace over the Barents Sea and land at Bodø, Norway. Total distance, 2,800 miles over denied territory. Flight time, approximately 9 hours. The mission has been planned for months, delayed repeatedly by weather and political concerns. President Eisenhower is scheduled to meet Soviet Premier Khrushchev at a summit conference in Paris in just 2 weeks. The State Department worries about the diplomatic implications of a U-2 flight so close to the summit, but the CIA insists the mission is critical. Tyuratam, the Soviet missile test facility, is showing unusual activity. American intelligence needs current photographs. Eisenhower personally approves the mission with one condition: it must be completed by May 1st. No U-2 flights within 2 weeks of the Paris summit. May 1st, May Day, the most important Soviet holiday, the day of military parades and communist celebration. The irony doesn't escape anyone at CIA headquarters. At 0620 hours on May 1st, Francis Gary Powers climbs into the cockpit of U-2 Article 360, serial number 566693. The aircraft carries a full load of fuel and 7 cameras loaded with fresh film. In the cockpit, Powers has maps, a survival kit, and the silver dollar containing the poison pin. The weather briefing shows clear skies over the Soviet Union, ideal photography conditions. At 0626 hours, Powers releases the brakes and begins his takeoff roll. The U-2's long wings generate lift almost immediately. Within seconds, he's airborne, climbing into the darkness. He will never land that aircraft. Soviet airspace, May 1st. 1960, 0830 hours. 4 hours into the flight, Francis Gary Powers cruises at 70,000 feet over the Ural Mountains. Behind him, thousands of feet of exposed film hold photographs of the Tyuratam missile complex. Images showing new launch pads under construction, new missiles in assembly. Below him, the Soviet air defense network is in chaos. The U-2 was detected the moment it crossed the border. Reports have gone up the chain of command to Premier Khrushchev himself, who reportedly demands to know why Soviet air defenses can't stop a single American aircraft. 14 MiG-19 fighters have scrambled to intercept. None can reach the U-2's altitude. One pilot pushes his aircraft so hard that the engine flames out and he barely survives the dead stick landing. Another pilot, desperate to reach the American intruder, is accidentally shot down by his own country's anti-aircraft missile, a fact the Soviets will conceal for decades. But near Sverdlovsk, the closed city that produces Soviet nuclear weapons. A battery of SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles waits. The SA-2 is a new weapon, specifically designed to reach the extreme altitudes where the U-2 operates. It has never been fired at an American aircraft. At 08:53 hours, the battery commander receives authorization to fire. 3 missiles launch in rapid succession. The first 2 miss. The third detonates close enough to Power's aircraft to shatter the tail section and send the U-2 into an uncontrollable spin. Power's account of the next seconds varies in different tellings, but the facts are clear. The aircraft begins to tumble violently. The centrifugal force pins Powers against the cockpit canopy. He cannot reach the destruct switches that would destroy the aircraft's cameras and equipment. He cannot position himself properly to eject. The U-2 breaks apart around him. Somehow, Powers separates from the cockpit. His parachute deploys automatically at 15,000 feet. He floats down toward a collective farm near the village of Maysky, watching the wreckage of his aircraft scatter across miles of Soviet farmland. He lands in a freshly plowed field. Within minutes, Soviet collective farm workers surround him, curious, uncertain how to handle this stranger who fell from the sky. Francis Gary Powers is alive, and he has not used his suicide pin. Washington, D.C., May 1st, 1960, 1400 hours. The U-2 has been overdue for 6 hours. At CIA headquarters, operations officers face a grim reality. Article 360 has almost certainly gone down somewhere over the Soviet Union, but there's reason for limited optimism. The U-2 carries a destruct mechanism that should obliterate the cameras and most sensitive equipment. The aircraft is designed to disintegrate on impact, and the pilot, if he survived at all, has been trained to resist interrogation and reveal nothing useful. The cover story is ready. Within hours, NASA issues a press release stating that a weather research aircraft operating from Adana, Turkey, has gone missing over eastern Turkey. The pilot apparently lost consciousness due to oxygen equipment failure, and the aircraft drifted off course. Search and rescue operations are underway. The story is thin but plausible. U-2s have been publicly operating as weather research aircraft for years. The cover story has been carefully prepared for exactly this contingency. For 3 days, the cover holds. Then on May 5th, Premier Khrushchev addresses the Supreme Soviet with a speech that sends shockwaves through Washington. The Soviet Union, Khrushchev announces, has shot down an American spy plane over Soviet territory on May 1st. The hostile aircraft was conducting aggressive reconnaissance deep inside the Soviet Union. The speech is explosive, but contains a crucial omission. Khrushchev says nothing about the pilot. CIA analysts believe they understand the Soviet strategy. If Powers is dead, or if his remains are unidentifiable, the Soviets can't prove American involvement. The cover story might still hold. The State Department doubles down. On May 6th, spokesman Lincoln White confirms that an unarmed NASA weather research plane has been missing since May 1st after the pilot reported difficulties with his oxygen equipment. The United States categorically denies that any American aircraft has deliberately violated Soviet airspace. It's a trap, and Khrushchev springs it on May 7th. In a second speech to the Supreme Soviet, Khrushchev reveals what he withheld in his first announcement. The pilot survived. He has been captured. He has confessed. The Soviets have recovered substantial portions of the aircraft, including the cameras. They have the developed film. They have Powers' maps, his flight plan, his survival equipment, and his silver dollar with the poison pin. The whole world knows, Khrushchev thunders, that Allen Dulles is no great weatherman. The cover story collapses completely. The Eisenhower administration is caught in a transparent lie. The president must publicly acknowledge what every intelligence professional has known for years. The United States has been systematically violating Soviet airspace with spy planes. The political fallout is immediate and devastating. Lubyanka Prison, Moscow, May through August, 1960. Francis Gary Powers sits in a cell in the most feared building in the Soviet Union. KGB interrogators work on him in shifts, not with physical torture, but with psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, and relentless questioning. What was your mission? Who gave you your orders? What did you photograph? What do you know about other U-2 operations? Who are the other pilots? Powers walks a careful line. He acknowledges his mission. The Soviets have overwhelming physical evidence anyway. He provides general information about U-2 operations that the Soviets likely already know, but he withholds specifics, names of other pilots, details of other missions, technical information about the aircraft's most sensitive systems. His interrogators push harder. They show him photographs of the wreckage, cameras intact, film recovered. They show him his own maps with the flight route clearly marked. They play recordings of Soviet radar tracking his aircraft across their country. But Powers doesn't break. He admits what he must, deflects what he can, and maintains his composure through weeks of interrogation. What the Soviets don't know, what Powers will never tell them, is how much critical intelligence he's protecting. The U-2 program has penetrated Soviet airspace 24 times. The photographs have revealed the location of every major missile installation, every nuclear facility, every bomber base in the Soviet Union. That intelligence has shaped American defense policy for 4 years. Powers knows all of it, and he says nothing. By August, Soviet interrogators have extracted everything they're likely to get. Powers is transferred to Vladimir Prison to await trial. Hall of Columns, Moscow, August 17th through 19th, 1960. The trial of Francis Gary Powers is a showcase of Soviet propaganda, carefully staged for maximum political impact. The Hall of Columns, where Stalin's body lay in state in 1953, is packed with Soviet officials, foreign diplomats, and journalists from around the world. Powers sits in the defendant's dock, wearing a blue suit the Soviets have provided. His parents have been granted visas to attend, a humanitarian gesture designed to demonstrate Soviet magnanimity. His CIA-appointed lawyer, a Virginia attorney named Frank Rogers, sits nearby, though Soviet law gives him limited ability to participate. The prosecution presents its case methodically. They display wreckage from the aircraft. They show the recovered cameras and developed film. They play recordings of Powers' confession during interrogation. They argue that Powers is an agent of American aggression, a violator of Soviet sovereignty, a criminal who deserves severe punishment. Powers' Soviet-assigned defense attorney, a colonel in the Soviet military, offers a tepid defense that essentially concedes guilt while arguing for leniency. Powers himself takes the stand and reads a statement expressing regret for his actions, a statement carefully crafted to acknowledge facts without revealing classified information. "I realize," Powers tells the court, "that I have committed a grave crime against the Soviet Union and deserve to be punished." The verdict is predetermined. After 3 days of testimony, the court finds Francis Gary Powers guilty of espionage and sentences him to 10 years imprisonment, 3 years in prison followed by 7 years in a labor camp. In the context of Soviet justice, it's a relatively light sentence. Espionage typically carries execution. Khrushchev has apparently decided that a living American prisoner is more valuable than a dead one. Powers is transferred to Vladimir Central Prison to begin serving his sentence. But in Washington and Langley, plans are already forming to bring him home. Glienicke Bridge, Berlin, February 10th, 1962. 18 months have passed since the Moscow show trial. The diplomatic landscape has shifted. The failed Paris summit has come and gone. A new American president, John F. Kennedy, sits in the White House. The Berlin Wall has risen, dividing the city and the world, and negotiations have been quietly underway for months. The man the United States wants to trade for Powers is Rudolf Abel, the Soviet illegal captured by the FBI in 1957. Abel is a master spy, a colonel in the KGB who ran Soviet networks across America for 9 years. He's serving a 30-year sentence in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. The negotiations are conducted through back channels. Attorney James Donovan in New York, Soviet diplomats at the United Nations. The details are hammered out in secret meetings that neither government acknowledges. The exchange point is chosen for symbolic and practical reasons. The Glienicke Bridge connecting West Berlin to Potsdam in East Germany. The Americans control one end, the Soviets control the other. The middle of the bridge belongs to no one. On the morning of February 10th, 1962, 2 groups of men approach the bridge from opposite sides. From the west comes Francis Gary Powers, escorted by American officials. He's thinner than he was 2 years ago. The Soviet prison diet has taken its toll, but he walks under his own power, carrying a small bag of personal belongings. From the east comes Rudolf Abel, Colonel William Fischer of the KGB. He's 60 years old, gray-haired, dignified. He served less than 5 years of his 30-year sentence. The exchange happens in the center of the bridge. Powers walks east past Abel walking west. They don't speak, they barely make eye contact. 2 men who have never met, whose fates have become intertwined by the cold calculations of the Cold War. On the western side of the bridge, American officials meet Powers with relief and restraint. No celebrations, no press conferences, just a quiet handshake and a flight to the United States. Francis Gary Powers is finally going home. The U-2 shootdown changed everything, and nothing. The immediate diplomatic fallout was severe. The Paris summit collapsed before it began. Khrushchev stormed out, demanding an apology that Eisenhower refused to give. Superpower relations froze for months, but the intelligence mission continued. Within weeks of Powers' capture, U-2 flights resumed, not over the Soviet Union, but along its borders and over other targets. Cuba, China, Vietnam. The aircraft proved too valuable to ground, and the technology evolved. By 1962, the first Corona reconnaissance satellites were operational, cameras in orbit, photographing the Soviet Union without violating airspace. The U-2 had demonstrated what was possible. Satellites would make it permanent. Francis Gary Powers faced a different kind of aftermath. When he returned to the United States, some questioned his conduct. Why hadn't he used the suicide pin? Why hadn't he destroyed the aircraft more completely? Why had he cooperated with Soviet interrogators? A Senate Armed Services Committee investigation cleared him of wrongdoing in March 1962. The committee found that Powers had followed orders, resisted interrogation effectively, and revealed no critical intelligence. CIA Director John McCone publicly commended his conduct, but the questions lingered. Powers found himself unwelcome at the CIA, which released him from his contract with a modest severance. He testified, wrote a memoir, and tried to rebuild a life that had been shattered at 70,000 feet over Sverdlovsk. He found work as a test pilot for Lockheed, the same company that built the aircraft that changed his life. Later, he flew helicopter traffic reports for a Los Angeles radio station. On August 1, 1977, 17 years after his shootdown, Francis Gary Powers died when his helicopter ran out of fuel over Encino, California, and crashed in a field near a Little League baseball game. He was 47 years old. His final flight ended much like his most famous one, with a sudden fall from the sky. What did the U-2 program actually accomplish? The numbers tell part of the story. Between 1956 and 1960, U-2 aircraft conducted 24 successful overflights of the Soviet Union. They photographed every major military installation in the country. They located and tracked every Soviet ICBM site. They provided the first accurate assessment of Soviet nuclear capabilities. But the real impact was strategic. In the mid-1950s, American intelligence believed the Soviet Union was racing ahead in bomber production. The bomber gap terrified military planners and drove massive increases in American defense spending. U-2 photographs proved the gap was fictional. The Soviets had far fewer long-range bombers than anyone feared. By the late 1950s, a new fear emerged: the missile gap. Politicians warned that the Soviet Union was building intercontinental ballistic missiles far faster than America. The gap became a campaign issue in the 1960 presidential election. U-2 photographs and later satellite imagery proved this gap was also fictional. The Soviets had a handful of operational ICBMs, not the hundreds that critics claimed. American planners could make decisions based on evidence rather than fear. The U-2 program also established precedents that shape intelligence collection today. The concept of overhead reconnaissance, cameras flying higher than defenders can reach, evolved from aircraft to satellites to drones. The U-2 itself remains in service today, more than 65 years after its first flight. Upgraded versions continue to fly missions that satellites cannot replicate, and the program demonstrated something about American resolve. Even after the 1960 shootdown, even after the diplomatic catastrophe and public humiliation, the United States continued to gather intelligence on its adversaries. The methods changed, the mission remained. Francis Gary Powers became an unlikely symbol of that persistence. A coal miner's son from Virginia who flew higher than any human before him, a pilot who survived when his aircraft disintegrated around him, a prisoner who protected secrets despite months of interrogation, a man who came home through an exchange that proved even superpowers could negotiate when the stakes were high enough. His U-2 was supposed to be invulnerable. It wasn't. His mission was supposed to be undetectable. It wasn't. His capture was supposed to be impossible. It wasn't. But the intelligence kept flowing. The cameras kept clicking. And when satellites replaced aircraft over denied territory, they carried the same purpose into orbit. See everything, know everything, miss nothing. The U-2 made that possible. Powers proved that even failure couldn't stop it. The wreckage of Article 360 sat in a Moscow museum for decades, a trophy of Soviet air defense, a reminder of American humiliation. Visitors could see the cameras that photographed their country, the flight suit that protected an American spy, the silver dollar that concealed a poison pin never used. But the real lesson wasn't in the museum. The real lesson was in the intelligence files at Langley, the photographs that revealed Soviet weakness when American politicians preached Soviet strength, the evidence that prevented panic and guided strategy, the truth that cameras could capture when spies could not. Francis Gary Powers fell from the sky on May Day 1960. He spent 2 years in Soviet prisons. He came home across a bridge in Berlin, traded for a Soviet spy who had operated in America for nearly a decade. He could have been forgotten, a footnote in Cold War history, a pilot who got unlucky, a program that got exposed. Instead, he became a symbol of something larger: the willingness to fly into danger for intelligence, the discipline to resist interrogation under pressure, the recognition that some missions matter more than the men who fly them. The U-2 program was compromised that May Day, but it wasn't defeated. The flights continued. The cameras kept shooting, the intelligence kept flowing, and when Francis Gary Powers walked across the Glienicke Bridge into West Berlin, he proved something the Soviets never understood. You can shoot down the plane, you can capture the pilot, you can put him on trial and parade him before the world, but you can't stop America from watching. The game ended, not with a bullet, but with a bridge. The truth mattered then. It matters now. Subscribe before this file disappears.